Welcome to part 3 of my Geometry Nodes for Beginners Blender tutorial series. So in the previous part we had created this curve object and then we created these leaves and So in the previous part of the tutorial series, we created this leaf object and then we distributed the leaf on this curve. Now for adding the flower, we could do the same thing. So we could model a separate flower object and then we could distribute that flower object on the top of the curve. However, because this is a beginner tutorial, I want to show you different methods of geometry nodes and different ways to use geometry nodes. So we're actually going to be creating the flower object completely within the geometry nodes and then we'll be adding it to the top of the stem. And the benefit of creating the flower completely with geometry nodes is that it's more customizable. So once we create the flower, we'll have custom settings to change the size of the petals and the thickness of the petals and also the amount of petals on the flower. So we're going to start by creating the center of the flower. So we'll go to the add menu and we're going to start to search for a cone. So instead of adding a cone in the 3D viewport, we're going to add a cone right here in the geometry nodes. Now to preview the cone, we turned on the Node Wrangler add-on earlier in the tutorial series. So if you hold down the Shift and Alt key, you can then select the node and that'll preview it. So there is our cone object. So we're going to use this to create the center of the flower. So here on the radius top, we want to make this bigger. So let's just start by turning this to the 1. And then on the radius bottom, let's turn this way down. I'll make it pretty small, not all the way down, but pretty small like that. And then also this depth here, we can change this depth and we'll bring the depth way down because we don't want it to be that big. And then maybe I'll turn the radius bottom up just a little bit. So something like that. So now I want to add a subdivision surface to smooth it out. So let's go to the add menu and we're going to search for the subdivision surface and we'll stick it here after the cone. Now the problem with this is it's making it really sharp and that is because there aren't enough vertices here on the edges. So to fix this, we can change the side segments and the fill segments. So on the side segments, let's turn this up quite a bit. And so if I hold down the Z button and go into wireframe, you can see that now there are those side segments. You can see if I change this, it's adding more geometry. So I'm going to turn the side segments to a 7, and then here on the fill segments, I'm going to turn this up to like a 4. So now if I go back to solid view, you can see the edge is much more round. And then I also want to shade it smooth. So let's go to the add menu and we're going to search for the set shade smooth, and we'll put the set shade smooth after the subdivision surface modifier. And then you can see right here, it is still a little bit stretched. So right here on the radius top, I'm going to turn this down a bit so that it's not quite as stretched. And then let's also turn the depth down a little bit, something like that. And also the fill segments here, we could turn that up a little bit just to give it a bit more detail. All right, so these 3 nodes here, these are going to be the flower center. So if you select these nodes by clicking and dragging over them, you can press Ctrl J and that is going to join it together into a frame. And this is just to keep the nodes nicely organized. Now with the frame selected, I can press F2 to add a label, and I'm just going to rename this flower center. And let's drag the flower center up here so we have more space underneath it. So I now want to create the petals, and we'll create the petals down here. So for the petals, I'll go to the add menu and we want to add another default object to start with. So I'm going to start by searching for a cylinder. We're going to add the mesh primitive cylinder. Let's drop it here. And then again, to preview it, we can Control Alt and select it. And so that'll plug the group output directly up to it so that we can see it. Now for this one, I want to turn the radius down so that it is smaller. And then I also want to turn the depth down quite a bit so it is very thin. So I'll turn the depth maybe to just like a 0.4, and then the radius here, maybe I'll just turn this to like a 0.5 for now. Now I want to stretch it out so that it actually looks like a petal. So I will go to the add menu and we are going to search for the transform geometry node, and let's put it here after the cylinder. So now this transform geometry can actually edit the cylinder. So we can change the X scale to make it longer. So let's turn the X scale to 3. So now it is kind of the shape of a petal. And then I also want to give this a subsurface as well. So if we go to the add menu, let's search for the subdivision surface. We can put this one again right here after the transform geometry so that it kind of smooths it out. And you can see it looks a bit low quality, so let's turn the levels to 2. And also if you want to, right up here on the flower center, we could also turn that up to 2. I forgot to do that, but that will make it a bit more detailed. Now you can see the same problem is happening where it's being really stretched. So let's go back to the mesh cylinder. I'll go into the wireframe for the subdivision surface. We can put this one again right here after. So let's, I forgot to do that, but that will make it a bit want to right up here on the flower center, we could also turn that up to 2. I forgot to do that, but that will make it a bit more detailed. Now you can see the same problem is happening where it's being really stretched. So let's go back to the mesh cylinder. I'll go into the wireframe view so we can actually see what it's doing, and we can change the side segments and the fill segments to add more geometry. So I'm going to turn the side segments to 4 and then the fill segments to 3. So if I go back to solid view, you can see the edges there is quite smooth. And then let's also add the set shade smooth again. So we'll go to the add menu, we'll search for the set shade smooth, and we will put that after the subsurf. So just stick it right there so it is nice and smooth. All right, so now we want to have a bunch of these going around in a circle, and they're going to be going around the cone. So just like we did with the leaves in the previous part, we're going to be adding the instance on points node, and we're going to instance the petals around another object. So if I go to the add menu, let's go here to the search, and I'm going to search for the instance on points. Let's use the instance on points, and I can put this here after the set shade smooth. Now this object here, this is the object that's going to be instanced. So let's put the points into the instance. And then you can see it's disappeared, and that's because we need something to add into the points. Now I want to add something which is circular because I want all the petals to be going around in a circle. So I can go to the add menu, and I'm going to search for a mesh circle. So let's add the mesh circle, and we will stick it right up here. Now to preview it, you can Shift Alt and select it, and you can see there is the mesh circle. And so all of these little points here, all the little vertices, if we plug that into the points, those will be the points. And so then there is going to be this cylinder object distributed around those points. So let's put the mesh into the points, and then I can Shift Alt and select the instance on points. Now you can see it's a big mess here, but that is because they're all overlapping. So if I just use the transform geometry right here, if I click and drag down and then drag back and forth, if I make these really small, you'll be able to actually see what they're doing. So if I make these a really small number, you can see now they are being instanced all around the circle, so it is making a circular shape, but they're really stretched out. But I will just undo that. I'm going to leave the scale values how they are. Now, if you want to change how many there are so that they're not overlapping, we can change the mesh circle vertices, because the mesh circle is going into the points, so all of the vertices on the mesh circle are going to be points to be distributed. So let's turn the vertices down, and if I turn the vertices down, there's going to be much less of them. So let's turn the mesh vertices just to like a 10, and that way there will be 10 petals. But you can use this to control the petals. Now we can change the scale later, but another problem that I want to fix before that is that all of the petals are going in the same direction. So they're all going back and forth. But I instead want all of the petals to be distributed, and I want them to come out going around in a circle. And so what we need to do is put some sort of data into the rotation, which is going to tell each petal to go out away from the circle. So to do this, we can use the normal data of the vertices. And if you haven't heard about normals in Blender, then you might want to check out my understanding normal value is the direction that it's pointing. So for example, if I go here to this leaf object, the normal of these faces right here on the top of the leaf are going up, but then the normal direction of these faces on the bottom of the leaf, each one of these petals by the normal's rotation. So to do this, we can go to the add menu, and to get the normal data, we can simply search for a normal node, and we will drop the normal down here. So let's now put the normal into the rotation. And so it's going to use the normal from whatever mesh we have, and that is this mesh circle. So you can see it looks a little bit better, but it's kind of weird. It's kind of like stacking around itself. And so to fix this, I also want to add another node in here, which is going to control the rotation. So I will go to the add menu, and this is going to be a new node we haven't used before, and that is the align Euler to vector. So we're going to search for align Euler to vector. Click here, and this node, we can drop it in between the normal and the instance. And so this is going to edit the rotation values. So let's stick it here. Now we actually want the normal to be going into the vector instead. So let's put the normal into the vector. And now that we've done that, you can see that it is opening up like a flower. So it looks like some petals. Now, if for some reason they are pointed in the wrong direction, you can change the align Euler to vector. You can change the Y or the X or the Z and just rotate it to the correct axis. But for me, the X axis is the correct one. And then also this factor here is going to make the align Euler to vector have less of an effect. So this is it with 0 effect, and then this is it with 1. So we want to keep the factor at 1 so that it's fully rotating all of them around. And then if you want to change the size of the petals, you can change the transform geometry right here. So what I'm going to do is click and then drag down, and then I can drag back and forth. And what you can do while you're dragging the values is you can hold down the shift key so long it is up and down to keep my node select all of the frame. And if I select the frame and again get it out of the way, we'll press Ctrl J to drag it, and I'm going to rename it to petals. Alright, so we have our flower center and we have our petals, but we can't see them together. So just like we did earlier, we use this join geometry node to join mesh together. So we can add another one and then join the flower center and the petals together. So let's click on the join geometry, and I can just press Shift D to duplicate it, or you can just add a new one if you want to, and we can drop it up here. And then we can just plug the instance on points here and the set shade smooth, and we can plug them together. And then I can Shift Alt and select the join geometry. So it's as simple as that, they're now joined together. Then we can just plug the shift. Now we're on the scale values, just the radius here, so the radius of the translation. That kind of looks like Y1 and the Z1, but I don't really want to use these. I just want to use the X one to bring it in and out. And then I can just change the scale. So this is really the power of geometry nodes. This is what's so cool about doing modeling within geometry nodes, is that there's so many custom values you can control. So it would be really easy just to hand model the flowers, and in many cases it might be just easier and faster, and it might work better. But if for some reason you want a very customizable flower or some customizable object, you can create it within the geometry nodes, and then you have many different values you can control. Now there is another problem that you may have noticed, and that is that the center of the flower is too high. So that's really easy to change. If we go up here to the flower center, we just need to add a menu. Just want to add it. Translation, get right down. Upgraded, which we have finished the flower. Press Ctrl S again to save your Blender file. So now that we have finished the flower, we just need to put the flower on the stem. But unlike what we did for the leaves, if I Shift Alt and select this join geometry, I don't want to randomly put the flower around. I want to specifically put it here on the very top. So I'll just Shift Alt select the join geometry again. So we're going to start by adding the same node. So if you go to the add menu, we're again going to search for the instance on points. So it's this one here, instance on points, and we're going to stick it here after the join geometry. And let's also bring the group output right up here, and then we can also move them over. So the join geometry here, this is joining the flowers and the petals together. So the join geometry actually needs to be going into the instance. And then for the point here, we actually want to use the very original mesh that we started with, or the very original curve that we started with. So if I go way back over here to this group input, we want to take this original curve and we want to put it right over here into the points. So let's drag this over, and then if you push to the end with your mouse, you can see it'll move around, and we're going to stick it right up here and put it in the points. Now, just a real quick thing that I want to show you, you can see the wire is kind of overlapping the other nodes. So if you hold down the Shift key and then right click and drag over drag that, so you can just use this to keep your nodes more nicely organized. So I think I'll bring the wire straight over and then have it go up, and I can actually Shift right click and drag to add another one, and then this one I can kind of bring up here just to keep my nodes really nicely organized. Alright, so now that that's going into the points here, if I hit the tab key to go into edit mode, you can see that wherever a curve handle is, that is where a flower is going to be. But I instead just want there to be one flower at the very top. So we need to add another node, which is going to give it information of where all of these points are, and we can just tell it to use the first one. So to do that, I'll go to the add menu, and we're going to search for the endpoint selection. Let's click on the endpoint selection, drop it down here, and we can put this selection into this selection value on the instance on points. So this is giving it more data. So there is now a start and an end. So if I turn this to 0, you can't see the flower at all. But if I turn the start size to 1, actually I want to turn the end size to 1 because it's at the end of the curve. Now you can see that the flower is just on the end of the curve there. And if you were to continue to turn up the end size, then it would add the second one. And then if you were to turn it up again, it would add the third one. So it'll just keep adding more and more. But let's just keep this at 1. So now I need to add up the original geometry because you can't actually see the stem with the leaves. So let's just add that up by again adding a join geometry. So you can go to the add menu and add it here, or you can just select the join geometry, press Shift D to duplicate it. And because we want to join it up after we add the flower, we're going to stick it right here after the instance on points. So just drop it there. And then we want to take this join geometry here, because if I Shift Alt and select it, that is the curve with the leaves. So we're going to take the geometry and we're going to stick that here into this join geometry. And then I can Shift Alt select the join geometry. So now you can see that it's combined and we have the stem and the leaves and the flower. Now the flower is a little bit big, so I do want to make the flower smaller. So to do that, we want to make the flower center and the petals both smaller together. So instead of adding like transform geometries and making them smaller individually, we can add another transform geometry after they're joined together. So we'll go to the add menu. Again, we'll search for the transform geometry and we will stick this after the join geometry, and then we can just change the scale values. So again, click on the first one, drag down, and then you can drag left and right and that'll change the scale. So I might just turn these to like a 0.5 so it's a bit smaller, and that's actually a little bit too small, so I'll maybe turn this to like a 0.7. That is a bit better. Now there is another problem. If I select this handle here and rotate it, you can see that it's not actually rotating the flower. I can move it around, but I'm not actually able to rotate it, because if I rotate it, the flower isn't rotating. So what we need to do is give the flower the rotation data of the curve, so that when the curve rotates, the flower will also rotate. So to give it the curve's rotation data, I'm going to go to the add menu and we're going to search for the curve tangent node. So curve tangent. Let's click on the curve tangent. We'll just drop it down here. So now the curve tangent, that is going to go into the rotation, because this instance on points is instancing the flower. So if we put it into the rotation, it's going to control the rotation of the flower. So now if I rotate it, you can see it's kind of working, but it's kind of like rotating at an odd angle. And that's because we again need to add the align Euler to vector. And it's the same setup that we did right here, so the align Euler to vector. So again, we'll go to the add menu, we'll search for align Euler to vector, and we can just stick it here in the wire between the curve tangent and the rotation. So when the wire turns white, you can click there and that will plug it in to that setup there. And then again, we want the tangent to actually be going into the vector instead. So now you can see that it's at the wrong rotation, and that's because we need to change the rotation axis here. So there's Y, but we want to change it to Z. So now if I rotate this, you can see it's going to follow exactly the rotation of that curve handle. So that is really great. And you can see that sometimes when I rotate this around, like if I rotate it kind of right over here, you can see that there's now a leaf which is going through the flower. So later in the tutorial series, I'll show you how to fix that so that the leaves won't go through the flower. All right, so all of these nodes here, these nodes are going to be joining the flower onto the stem. So let's just kind of bring these together to organize them a little bit nicer. So kind of stick these in there and bring them closer together like that. And then I can select all of these by box selecting them. We'll press Ctrl J again to join it together into a frame, and this just keeps it nicely organized, so it's easy to understand what everything does, because you can see this is kind of getting quite large, but if you take a look at each part, it's easy just to break it down because we've joined them together. So let's select this, and then we'll press F2 to add a label, and we're going to rename this to flower on stem. So those are the nodes which put the flower on the stem. Let's save this file again with Ctrl S. All right, so this is going to wrap it up for part 3 of the Geometry Nodes for Beginners tutorial. turn this to 0 individually, we can turn this to like a 0.7.
Kittle's new AI tool can take your print-on-demand business to the next level. I've used other AI tools to try.
Welcome to part 4 of my Geometry Nodes for Beginners Blender tutorial series. So if you haven't seen the previous parts, then definitely check that out. I'll have a link to the tutorial playlist in the description. So in this part of the tutorial, we're going to do a few different things. We're going to be making the curve thicker as it goes down, so the curve will be thinner up here, but then as it goes down closer to the dirt, it's going to be thicker. We're also going to make sure that the leaves aren't going through the flower, because you can see some of the leaves go through the flower, so we'll be editing the geometry nodes to make sure that doesn't happen. And then I'm also going to show you how to draw curves, so that you can just draw wherever the flower is going to be, and then it will generate flowers. And then we will end with doing the materials. We'll be adding all the different materials to the flower. And speaking of materials, if you like using procedural materials in your artwork, custom thumbnail, procedural actually on my Blender, making the curve get thicker as it goes down. So to do this, let's navigate over here to the starting, and I'm going to drag the group input back, and then what I'm actually going to do is just box select these two nodes, and I'll press Ctrl J to join them together into a frame to keep them nicely organized. And if I press F2 to add a label, I want to rename this stem because these are the nodes which make the stem thick. So then right over here, before the stem nodes, I want to add some other nodes here which are going to control the thickness. So I'll go to the add menu and we'll go here to the search, and I'm going to search for the set curve radius. So we'll add the set curve radius. Let's click on this and we can drop it here after the group input, but before the curve to mesh. So stick it here. So this node will do exactly what it is called. It's going to set the curve radius, so it'll make the curve bigger or smaller, and you can change that value right there. Now, instead of just having one single value, I want the parts up here to be smaller, and then as it goes down, it gets bigger. So to do this, we need to give it some kind of curve data to tell it what part is down here and what part's up here. So I'm going to go to the add menu. And we're going to search for a spline perimeter node. So we'll add the spline perimeter right here, drop it here, and then we want to take the factor and we want to stick that into the radius. So you can see now it's very small down here, but then as it goes up, it gets bigger and bigger. Now I want to control this better, and so I want to actually switch it so that it's small here and then it gets bigger as it goes down. So to do that, I'll go to the add menu, I'll go to the search. We're going to search for the color ramp, and we're going to put the color ramp here in between the spline perimeter and the set curve radius. Now when you're using the color ramp in the geometry nodes, instead of thinking about it with the color values, think of it more like number values. So the black is going to equal 0, and then the white is going to equal 1. So you can see if I drag this around, you can see this is the large part of the curve. So if I drag this out, you can see there's going to be more white areas, and so more of the curve is going to be bigger. So this is like 1. And then this is going to be 0, so it's turning the value to 0. So if I drag this out, more of the curve is going to be smaller. Now I want to switch it, so to do that we can simply just switch these two values, so the white one will be over here and the black one will be over here. So now it's really small there, and then it gets bigger as it goes down. So now the value is starting as 1, and then as it goes up it gets smaller and smaller, and then it ends at 0, which is this black color. Now I don't want it to get quite that small because that is way too small. So if I click on the black color here, I can drag up the value and I can just make it a bit thicker. So I'm just going to make it kind of like a light gray, something like that, so it's not quite as thick. Now I want the entire thing to be a bit thicker, so if I go over here to the stem, I can take this radius here on the curved circle. This is going to be the data telling it what the shape is going to be, so it's going to be that circle shape. So I can just turn up the radius and make the entire thing thicker. So we're going to make it a bit thicker, so something like that is better. All right, so these three nodes here are creating the give it some kind of curve data to tell it what part is down here, spline here. So I'm going to go to the add menu, some kind of curve data to tell it what part is down here and what part's up here. So I'm going to go to the add, curve goes up, it gets bigger and bigger. Now I want to control this better, and so I want to actually switch it so that it's small here and then it gets bigger as it goes down. So to do that, I'll go to the add menu, I'll go to the search. We're going to search for here are creating the thickness what they do. All right, so the next thing that I want to do is make these leaves so that they don't go through the flower. And an easy way to do that is just to cut off the leaves so they aren't distributed anywhere up here. They're just distributed in the center part of the curve. So we need to add another node, which is basically going to trim the curve and make it smaller and kind of cut it back. So we'll go to the add menu and we're going to search for the trim curve node. And let's just drop this down here. And then we want to take the original curve data, which is this, and we want to stick this into the curve of the trim curve. And then let's Shift Alt and select the trim curve, and you can see there is our curve that we started with, and there is a start and an end value. So you can see if I want this to end sooner, I can turn that down, or I can turn this up. So I'm going to use the trim curve to cut back the curve, and we're going to make it end sooner, and then we will put that into the distribute points on faces right here on the leaves on stem, and that way they won't be distributed up here, they'll just be distributed down here. But before I put the curve into the mesh, this says curve right here, but then this says mesh. So we don't actually want to put the curve into the mesh. What we want to do is first convert this curve to a mesh, and then it can go into the mesh. So to do that, we'll go to the add menu, and we're just going to search for another curve to mesh node. So we'll add curve to mesh, and we can just stick it right there. So now that this has been converted to a mesh, I can take the mesh and I can replace it here for this one. And then let's just Shift Alt and select this join geometry to see it. Now this join geometry here is joining up our original mesh, and it's joining up the leaves on stem. However, you can't see the leaves, and this is because this leaves on stem doesn't actually have any mesh. So that is because this curve to mesh doesn't have any thickness. If I Shift Alt and select it, you can see it is just a wire here, it doesn't have any thickness. So we want this curve circle to also be going into this profile curve. And so now both of these curves have thickness. So if I Control Shift and select the join geometry, you can now see that the leaves are showing up, and that is because this curve here actually has thickness again. And so there's actually faces for the leaf object to be distributed on. So now here on the trim curve, we can just drag the start value and the end value, and I want to drag the end value down a bit, so like there, and then also the start value, I'll drag this up a bit because I don't want the leaves to be too far down. So this way now the leaves are only going to be in the center there. So if I navigate all the way back up here and Control Shift and select the join geometry, you can see now the leaves are not going through the flower. And then I do think it would be better if the leaves were also a little bit bigger. So let's go here to the leaves on stem, and here on the instance on points, we can click, drag down, and then we can drag these up bigger. We can make all the leaves just a little bit larger. And I also think adding a little bit more random rotation would be good. So on these two values, let's turn these to maybe like a 0.4, and this one here to also turn to like a 0.4. So there's a bit more randomness. All right, so we are now going to get started with the materials. So what I want to do is make some materials on some other objects, and then I'm going to show you how to put each material on the different parts. So if I just click back here to go to the layout, and let me hold down the Z button and go to the material preview just to see what this is looking like. So if I click over here to go to the material properties and click on new here to add a new material, I can take the base color and I can try to change this, but you can see it's not actually affecting the mesh. And that's because we haven't actually told the geometry nodes to add this material onto this object. So what we're going to do is we're going to add some new objects, and we're going to add materials to them, and then in the geometry nodes we'll tell the geometry nodes to put different materials on different parts of the mesh. So I'll go to the add menu here in the 3D viewport, and let's go here and add a UV sphere. And I will use the object context menu to shade it smooth, and let's bring it over, and I also want to select this one and bring this one over, and I want to make 3 different spheres. So let's scale this down, and then we'll duplicate this a couple more times. So you can press Shift D to duplicate. So now that we have 3 of them, we can add materials to the column. Be a little, maybe slightly towards the generate different. So let's node editor along with this, but if we're going to search, the last one here could be maybe like a light blue. So now it's the same as green onto this geometry node setup. So now we can add the materials to the flower. So if you select the flower, we can go right over here to geometry nodes, and let's also press Ctrl S to save the project. So to add the materials to the different objects, we need to add a node which is going to set that material. So we'll go to the add menu, and we're going to search for the set material node, and we'll drop it here. So we can just go along here and add each material to each part of the object. So again, hold down the Z button and go into the material preview just to see that. So first, let's do the flower center. So this set material, we want to stick it here at the end of the flower center, and then we can add that yellow color. So let's drop it here, and then you can see it didn't do anything. That's because we need to click here, and we need to tell it what object we want. So we want to use the center. So choose center, and now the center there is that yellow color. Let's also go to the and we can drop it here after the group input. but it's the white one will be over here and the black one will be over here. So now it's really small there, and then it gets bigger. I'm just going to go to the add menu. I'll go to the search. Now it's really small there. Drag it what the shape is going to be. So it's going to be that circle shape. If I go over here, something like it what the shape is going to be curve. So I'm going to click and drag to box select all these nodes. I'm going to collect what they do. All right, so the next thing that I want to do is make these leaves so that they don't go through the flower. And an easy way to do that is just to cut off the leaves so they aren't distributed anywhere up here. They're just distributed in the center part of the curve. So we need to add another node, which is basically going to trim the curve and make it smaller and kind of cut it back. So we'll go to the add menu and we're going to search for the trim curve node. And let's just drop this down here. And then we want to take the original curve data, which is this, and we want to stick this into the curve of the trim curve. And then let's Shift Alt and select the trim curve. And you can see there is our curve that we started with, and there's a start and an end value. So you can see if I want this to end sooner, I can turn that down, or I can turn this up. So I'm going to use the trim curve to cut back the curve, and we're going to make it end sooner, and then we will put that into the distribute points on faces right here on the leaves on stem, and that way they won't be distributed up here, they'll just be distributed down here. But before I put the curve into the mesh, this says curve right here, but we're just going to start there. So now that this has been, let's just Shift Alt and select this join geometry to see it. Now this join geometry here is joining up our original mesh and it's joining up the leaves on stem. However, you can't see the leaves, and this is because this leaves on stem doesn't actually have any mesh. So that is because this curve to mesh doesn't have any thickness. If I Shift Alt and select it, you can see it is just a wire here, it doesn't have any thickness. So we want this curve circle to also be going into this profile curve. And so now both of these curves have thickness. So if I Control Shift and select the join geometry, you can now see that the leaves are showing up, and that is because this curve here actually has thickness again. And so there's actually faces for the leaf object to be distributed on. So now here on the trim curve, we can just drag the start value and the end value, and I want to drag the end value down a bit. So welcome to part 5 of my geometry nodes. Change the type group. Welcome to part 4 of my geometry nodes for click, drag down, and then we can shade it smooth, a randomly. Different color. So to do that, we're actually going to use the shader editor. So let's just select the petals object, and then we can click color, maybe slightly different color. It has a different object info node which does different things. We're going to shader editor. So let's just select the petals object, and then we can click right here to go to the shading workspace. So let's hold down the Z button and go into the material preview just to see this. So to add random values, what I can do is go to the add menu here in the shader editor, and we're going to search for the object info node. Now, don't get confused with the object info node in the geometry node editor. The geometry node editor also has an object info node, but it does something different. The shader editor has a different object info node which does different at things. So let's add the object info. Now the object info has this random value. Let's take the random value and we can put it up to the base color. So what the random value does is it will randomly generate colors for each object going from black to white. And you can kind of think of black and white being like 0 and 1. So you don't have to follow along with this, but if I just press Shift D to duplicate and drop it here and continue to duplicate this, you can see every time I duplicate it, the object will randomly be generated between black and white. So I'll Control Z to undo that. Now, instead of it being black and white, I want to create custom colors. So to do that, I'll go to the Add menu, we'll go here to the search, and we're going to search for a color ramp node. And the color ramp node is also in the geometry node editor, and it basically does the same for the color and kind of a petals you want. Also, let's drop it random image for a color, a darker green. Just control that again, repeat that, and then if I something be not, that'll add. Just you can already see here on the flower, it's adding the green object, and that is because we're instancing the object onto this geometry node setup. So now we can add the materials to the flower. So if you select the flower, we can go right over here to geometry nodes, and let's also press Ctrl S to save the project. So to add the materials to the different objects, we need to add a node which is going to set that material. So we'll go to the Add menu, and we're going to search for the Set Material node, and we'll drop it here. So we can just go along here and add each material to each part of the object. So again, hold down the Z button and go into the material preview just to see that. So first, let's do the flower center. So this set material, we want to stick it here at the end of the flower center, and then we can add that yellow color. So let's drop it here, and then you can see it didn't do anything. That's because we need to click here, and we need to tell it what object we want. So we want to use the center. So choose center, and now the center there is that yellow color. Let's also go to the Add menu, and we're going to add another set material node. So if you go to the Add menu and go here to the search, you can see that the default ones here are going to be the ones which you have most used. So let's grab the set material again. And this set material we're going to put after the petals. So just drop it here and stick it inside the petals frame. And then we can click on the color here, and we can just choose the petals. And we're adding it here because it's after it's already created the geometry nodes. So again, you start from left and then it reads to the right. So all of these nodes here are creating the petals, and then we're setting the material. Now there's a problem with this, and that is that each petal is a different color because we're using the instance on points. So it's sort of imagining these as being all of their own object, and so it's randomly creating different colors. Now you could leave it like that if you want to, but I don't really want to do that because in real life flowers aren't really like that. Flowers are always like one color. So what we can do is we can add a node here after the instance on points, and that node is basically going to tell the geometry nodes that this is all considered as one object. So to do that, we'll go to the Add menu, we'll go to the search, and we're going to search for the Realize Instances node. So we're realizing the instances, and so basically they're all being applied as one single mesh. And now they're one mesh, you can see that is all the same color. All right, so we're almost done, but we also need to add that other green material, the stem material. So if we just look around here, let's see where the stem is, and here is the stem. So we just want to stick it right here after we create the stem. So I'll go to the Add menu, we're going to add one more set material node, and we will add the set material here after the curve to mesh, and let's actually just stick it here in this frame here just so that it's better organized. And then if we go to the set material and click on the drop down, we can add the stem material. And there we go, so now our flower has all of the different colors. So let's go back over here to the layout, and the last thing I'm going to show you in this video is how to draw the different flowers. So if you select the object and tab into edit mode, you can move the curve handles around, and you can scale them and rotate them, and that'll move the flower. And then if you wanted to add a new flower, you could select this curve here, you could duplicate it with Shift D, and then you could hit E to extrude, and you could extrude that up, and you can make another flower. But there is a really cool feature in the edit mode of the curves which will allow you to draw curves. So if you press the T key to open up the side panel, you can click on this button right here, which will draw curves. So now that I've enabled this, I can just left click and drag and then let go, and it's going to generate a flower right there. And I can continue to do this many times, so I can make some cool stylized flowers, maybe have one which which is kind of object, and attach, you can see that, and then we're setting that another stick here at the end of the filter node. You can go right over here to geometry nodes, and let's also press that material. We want all of their own object, and so it's you start from left and then it reads to the right. So all of these nodes here are creating the petals, and then we're setting the material. Now there's probably creating different color flowers. So to do that, you can see that is all the